Hey everyone, tonight we dim the lights, perhaps pull up a cozy blanket, and prepare for a journey into the surprisingly murky yet utterly fascinating past of a condiment you probably have sitting in your fridge right now. We're talking about ketchup. You squeeze it onto your fries, slather it on your burgers, and maybe even dollop it onto your eggs without a second thought. But what if I told you that the vibrant, tangy, tomato-rich sauce you know and love has a secret history, one that doesn't begin with tomatoes at all, and one that stretches back across oceans and centuries? You probably won't survive this journey without at least one jaw-dropping, wait what my moment. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. Knowing you're out there in all your different time zones makes this shared experience even more special. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins not in an American diner, nor even in the sun-drenched fields of Italy, but far across the globe on the bustling shores of Southeast Asia. You're standing amidst the vibrant chaos of a 17th-century bustling port in what is now modern-day Vietnam or southern China. The air is thick with the scent of spices, exotic fruits, and the unmistakable pungent aroma of the sea. You hear the chatter of merchants, the creak of wooden ships, and the cries of street vendors. This is where our journey truly starts, with a sauce that would be utterly unrecognizable to your modern palate, yet holds the genetic blueprint for what would one day become your beloved ketchup. This ancient ancestor was not a tomato-based condiment, nor was it sweet. Instead, it was a fermented fish sauce, a staple across various Asian cuisines for millennia. Think of the intense savory umami bomb that is Vietnamese nuoc ma mars or Thai nam pla chaos today. This was the original ketchup, or rather its direct linguistic and culinary progenitor. Its name, Ketchup or Ketchup, likely originated from the Hokkien Chinese dialect referring to the brine of pickled fish. You can almost taste the sharp, salty tang in the humid air, a flavor that speaks of deep preservation and concentrated essence. The purpose of this sauce was simple and profound: to add a powerful burst of savory depth and saltiness to dishes that might otherwise be bland, particularly rice and vegetables. It was a seasoning, a flavor enhancer, and a source of vital minerals. Imagine a diet largely centered around grains and simple greens. A few drops of this potent fish sauce could transform a meal, awakening the taste buds and providing a crucial savory counterpoint. It was a condiment born of necessity and ingenious preservation techniques in a hot climate where fresh ingredients spoiled quickly. The process was straightforward, though lengthy. Fish, often anchovies or other small oily varieties, would be layered with salt in large earthenware pots or wooden vats. These would then be left to ferment under the sun for weeks or months, sometimes even longer. The natural enzymes in the fish, combined with the salt, would slowly break down the proteins, yielding a clear reddish-brown, intensely savory liquid. This liquid was then strained, sometimes multiple times, to remove any solids. The result was a concentrated essence, a liquid umami far removed from the thick, sweet, tangy sauce you squeeze from a bottle today. Historians still argue whether the earliest versions of ketchup were predominantly used as a dipping sauce or primarily as a cooking ingredient to flavor larger dishes. So as you breathe in the unfamiliar aromas of this ancient Asian port, you stand at the very birthplace of ketchup. It's a sauce born of fish salt and thyme, a testament to culinary ingenuity in a world without refrigeration. And this pungent, savory ancestor is about to embark on a truly incredible journey, one that will see it utterly transformed as it travels across oceans and adapts to entirely new palates. Having established ketchup's pungent fishy origins on the bustling docks of Southeast Asia, you now delve deeper into the very essence of The original Ketchup. This isn't just about fish sauce. It's about understanding the core philosophy and ingredients that define this ancient condiment, setting it apart entirely from its modern tomato-based descendant. Imagine the culinary landscape of 17th century coastal Asia, particularly regions influenced by Chinese and Vietnamese traditions. Food was prepared with efficiency and a deep understanding of fermentation as a means of both preservation and flavor development. Ketchup or Ketchup, as it might have been pronounced in certain dialects, was a masterclass in extracting maximum flavor from humble ingredients. Its very name, referring to the brine or juice of pickled fish, tells you everything you need to know about its primary source. You can almost feel the salt crystals on your tongue even before tasting the liquid. The core ingredients were deceptively simple: fish and salt. That's pretty much it. Small, often oily fish like anchovies were favored for their high enzyme content, which was crucial for the fermentation process. These fish would be thoroughly cleaned, then mixed vigorously with a generous amount of salt. The salt wasn't just for flavor, it acted as a powerful preservative, drawing moisture out of the fish and creating an anaerobic environment that prevented spoilage while allowing beneficial fermentation to occur. This was ancient chemistry at its finest, a way to make perishable protein sources stable for months or even years in a hot, humid climate. The fermentation process itself was slow and deliberate. The salted fish mixture would be packed tightly into large earthenware jars or wooden barrels, then sealed and left in the sun, sometimes for many months, even a year or more. The heat accelerated the enzymatic breakdown of the fish proteins, slowly transforming them into amino acids, which are responsible for the incredibly savory umami flavor. This was not a quick process, but one that relied on patience and a deep understanding of natural processes. The liquid that gradually seeped out or was pressed from the fermenting mass was the precious Ketchup. You might witness a peasant carefully tending these large pots, rotating them for optimal sun exposure, knowing their livelihood and flavor depended on it. Unlike many modern condiments, the original Ketchup was typically a tasse, thin, clear liquid. After fermentation, the solid fish remnants were strained out sometimes through fine cloths to yield a transparent reddish-brown sauce. This clarity was a sign of quality, indicating a well-fermented and properly processed product. It was a fluid seasoning meant to be added drop by drop or to form a dipping sauce rather than a thick, viscous accompaniment. Its texture was as important as its flavor profile. Historians still argue whether the initial intent of Ketchup was to create a food preservative itself or primarily to produce a concentrated flavor enhancer for bland diets. The parent farpy flavor profile was intensely savory, salty, and pungent, with deep umami notes that would linger on the palate. There was no sweetness, no tang from vinegar, initially at least, and certainly no tomato flavor. It was a pure explosion of fermented fish essence designed to awaken the taste buds and complement the often starchy, unseasoned main dishes like rice or plain noodles. It was a seasoning of depth, not of bright freshness. So as you breathe in the powerful earthy aromas of this ancient Asian condiment, you understand that the original Ketchup was a masterpiece of fermentation, a testament to culinary ingenuity born of necessity. It was a potent, salty, and utterly fish-centric sauce, genetically linked to the modern ketchup you know, but a world away in taste and texture. This pungent ancestor was about to embark on a momentous journey, crossing oceans and eventually shedding its fishy identity. With the potent fishy essence of original Ketchup lingering in your imagination, you now witness its momentous leap across continents, a journey that would profoundly alter its destiny. Our narrative transports you to the 17th and 18th centuries, a time of burgeoning global trade when intrepid Eastern shores, Western palates met and British traders first encountered and brought this unfamiliar Asian sauce back to Europe. Imagine the grand adventurous voyages of the British East India Company. Vast sailing ships laden with exotic spices, silks, and teas crisscrossed the Indian Ocean and ventured into the bustling ports of Southeast Asia. These intrepid sailors and merchants, spending months, sometimes years away from home, were exposed to entirely new culinary traditions and ingredients. It was amidst this vibrant exchange that they first encountered kakake chiap chakapi, a sauce utterly unlike anything known in England. You can almost smell the blend of salt spray and foreign spices clinging to the sails of their ships. The appeal of this fish sauce to British seafarers and traders was multifaceted. Firstly, it was an incredibly stable condiment. In a time before refrigeration, long voyages meant a diet of salted meat and hardtack notoriously bland and prone to spoilage. A highly concentrated fermented sauce like ketchup, which had already undergone a natural preservation process, was a godsend. It could withstand the heat and humidity of a ship's hold and provide a much-needed punch of flavor to otherwise monotonous rations. Imagine the relief of a sailor adding a few drops of this pungent liquid to his dried beef to make it palatable. Secondly, the British palate of the era, while perhaps less adventurous than today's, was certainly open to savory and pungent flavors. Remember, this was a time when strong flavors derived from pickling, salting, and preserving were common. The rich umami of ketchup, though unfamiliar, likely resonated with an existing appreciation for concentrated flavorings. It wasn't sweet, but intensely savory, which fit well within the context of their main meals. Historians still argue whether British traders initially saw ketchup as a novel ingredient to be adapted or primarily as a practical condiment for long sea voyages. As these traders returned to England, they brought with them not just exotic goods, but also culinary inspiration. The sauces they encountered in Asia, including ketchup, began to inspire a new category of condiments in Britain. Early mentions of ketchup in English texts appear in the late 17th and early 18th centuries, often described as a high sauce used to flavor meat or fish. These initial references usually describe a dark, savory liquid, clearly derived from the Asian original. You might find a ship's log entry casually mentioning a purchase of ketchup alongside spices and tea. However, the key here is adaptation. While the name, chess, and the concept of a savory fermented condiment were adopted, the ingredients immediately began to shift. The original fish sauce, while practical for sailors, might have been too foreign, too intensely fishy for broader European tastes once removed from its Asian context. Also, the specific fish used in Asia were not readily available in England, and the arduous, lengthy fermentation process was not easily replicated on a large scale in colder climates. This necessity for local adaptation set the stage for ketchup's profound transformation, slowly, subtly losing its original identity as it journeyed further west. As ketchup landed on British shores carried by intrepid sailors and merchants, its identity began to subtly yet definitively transform. This wasn't a static import, it was a foreign concept entering a new culinary landscape, and thus British adaptation begins. The scarcity of traditional Asian ingredients coupled with existing European tastes and methods forced a radical reinvention of this pungent fish sauce. Imagine a curious English cook in a bustling 18th century kitchen examining a bottle of this dark, savory liquid brought back from the East. Their first thought wouldn't be to replicate the exact fermentation process with exotic fish. Instead, they'd look to familiar ingredients and techniques to capture the essence of what they found appealing, a concentrated savory flavor enhancer. This led to a dramatic shift away from fish as the primary base. You can almost hear the clatter of pots and the sizzle of pans as they experiment with new, more accessible components. The most significant early adaptation was the replacement of fish with other umami-rich ingredients. that were readily available in England. While the original Asian sauce relied on long fermented fish, British cooks turned to ingredients like anchovies, which were a known source of salty, savory flavor and were easier to acquire. So some early British ketchups did contain anchovies, continuing a faint echo of the fishy past, but often mixed with other non-fish ingredients. It was a bridge from the East, but not a direct replica. However, the real diversification began as British cooks explored other ways to achieve that deep, savory punch. The concept of a ketchup expanded rapidly to encompass a wide array of ingredients that could be similarly fermented, pickled, or boiled down into a concentrated sauce. This was no longer just the ketchup. It was now a ketchup part of a new category of robust, often dark condiments designed to liven up bland meats or dull vegetables. Historians still argue whether this diversification was driven by a genuine spirit of culinary experimentation or simply the necessity of adapting a foreign concept to local ingredients. The earliest British ketchup recipes appearing in cookbooks from the early to mid-18th century reflect this creative adaptation. They are a fascinating glimpse into a culinary world before the tomato reigned supreme. You might find recipes that called for a base of vinegar, often a key component for preservation and tang, combined with shallots, garlic, ginger, and various spices. These were boiled down, strained, and bottled, creating a strong, pungent sauce that bore little resemblance to its fishy ancestor, save for its concentrated flavor profile and its use as a savory accompaniment. This process of adaptation highlights a key difference, the shift from a fermentation-driven process like traditional Asian fish sauce to a boiling and pickling method in Britain. While fermentation was still understood, the emphasis in these new ketchups was on cooking ingredients down and then preserving them with vinegar and salt, rather than relying on a long, slow enzymatic breakdown. This made production quicker and more predictable, suited to the demands of a busy European kitchen. So, as ketchup shed its scales and transformed on British shores, it became something new and distinctly European. This adaptation wasn't just about finding substitutes, it was about inventing a new category of condiments, powerful flavor boosters that would pave the way for its later monumental encounter with a very controversial fruit. The stage was set for mushrooms and then walnuts to briefly claim the title of ketchup. As the British culinary scene began to adapt the concept of ketchup, you witness a truly surprising shift in its primary ingredient. Forget fish now. Mushrooms take center stage. For a significant period, the quintessential British ketchup was a dark, savory, and intensely earthy sauce made almost entirely from fungi, far predating the tomato's eventual rise. Imagine an 18th century English kitchen not filled with the sweet scent of fruit preserves, but the rich, pungent aroma of simmering mushrooms. Wild mushrooms, plentiful in the British countryside, were a readily available and cost-effective ingredient, possessing a deep savory flavor profile and inherent umami that made them an ideal candidate to replace the exotic fish of the original Asian sauce. They could be boiled down their essence, concentrated into a dark, flavorful liquid. You can almost feel the damp, earthy texture of freshly gathered wild mushrooms as they're tossed into a pot. The process for making fresh mushroom ketchup was relatively simple, though still laborious. Large quantities of mushrooms, often common field mushrooms or even wilder varieties, would be chopped and layered with salt. This mixture would then be left for a day or two to draw out their juices. The liquid would then be strained off, spiced with ingredients like mace cloves, ginger, or pepper spices. Though expensive, were used sparingly for flavor in these condiments, and then slowly boiled down until it became a concentrated dark brown or almost black syrup. This reduction was key to both intensifying the flavor and improving its preservation. This mushroom-based ketchup was prized for its ability to add a deep umami richness to bland dishes. It wasn't spread like a modern condiment, Rather, a few drops would be added to gravies, stews, or roasted meats, much like a modern Worcestershire sauce or soy sauce. It served as a powerful flavoring agent, enhancing the savory qualities of the main course. Imagine a humble beef stew transformed by a dash of this earthy, concentrated mushroom essence. Historians still argue whether the popularity of mushroom ketchup was due more to the abundance of fungi or its natural umami properties, which mimicked the depth of the original fish sauce. The texture of mushroom ketchup was typically thin and runny, a stark contrast to the thick, viscous tomato ketchup of today. It was a liquid seasoning meant to blend seamlessly into other liquids or to provide a subtle background depth of flavor. Its color was dark, ranging from deep brown to almost black, a far cry from the bright red you associate with ketchup. This era of mushroom ketchup highlights the ingenious adaptability of British cooks. Faced with a foreign concept and unavailable ingredients, they looked to their own abundant resources and recreated the essence of a savory concentrated condiment using what was at hand. This brief yet significant period cemented the idea of ketchup as a versatile, savory, non-fishy sauce in the British culinary imagination, setting the stage for its next surprising transformation. The stage was set not for tomatoes, but for even stranger additions to the ketchup family. From the earthy depths of mushroom ketchup, the British palate, ever experimental, continued its adventurous journey, leading to walnuts and other oddities, taking their turn in the evolving history of this versatile condiment. You'll discover that 18th century English ketchups were a truly bizarre cabinet of culinary curiosities, embracing a wide array of ingredients that seem utterly out of place in your modern bottle of red. Imagine a pantry shelf in a Georgian-era home, lined not with uniform red bottles, but with an assortment of dark, often unlabeled liquids. Each might be a different ketchup, a concentrated essence of some unlikely ingredient. After mushrooms, walnuts, barm emerged as a particularly popular choice. Unripe green walnuts, still soft enough to be pierced with a needle, were often pricked, steeped in brine, then pounded and boiled with vinegar, and a medley of spices like mace, ginger, horseradish, and pepper. The result was an intensely dark, savory, and slightly bitter sauce, prized for its robust flavor and its ability to complement richer meats. You can almost feel the sticky sap of the green walnuts on your fingers as they are prepared. But the oddities didn't stop there. British cookbooks of the era reveal a staggering array of ingredients that found their way into ketchup. You might stumble upon recipes for oyster ketchup. Yes, a sauce made from oysters boiled down and fermented, often with white wine and spices intended to enhance fish dishes. Think of it as an early, very pungent seafood essence. Cucumber ketchup. Made from cucumbers, salt, and vinegar, sometimes with mustard seed, offering a lighter tangy profile. Berry ketchups. Surprisingly, some early recipes dabbled with berries like gooseberries, or even currants boiled with vinegar and spices, creating a sweet and sour concoction that hinted at the fruit-based ketchups to come, but still miles away from tomato. Lemon ketchup. Concentrated lemon juice boiled with salt and spices for a sharp, acidic condiment. The sheer variety of these ketchups highlights a few key aspects of 18th century British culinary philosophy. Firstly, it reveals a profound appreciation for concentrated flavors. Haute. In an age before powerful flavor enhancers, boiling down ingredients into a thick, syrupy consistency was a way to capture and preserve intense tastes. Secondly, it speaks to an experimental spirit, a willingness to try almost any ingredient in the pursuit of a versatile condiment. And thirdly, it underscores the importance of preservation. Vinegar, salt, and spices were not just for flavor. They were vital for extending the shelf life of these sauces in a world without refrigeration. Historians still argue whether the proliferation of these diverse ketchups was driven by a genuine love of variety or simply a trial-and-error process to find the most stable and palatable concentrates. These unusual ketchups were not generally served as dipping sauces in the modern sense. Instead, they were used sparingly added by the spoonful to gravy stews or braised meats during cooking, or presented at the table for diners to add a few drops to their main course, much like a gourmet hot sauce today. Their purpose was to add depth tang or a spicy kick, transforming otherwise bland dishes. You can almost see a gentleman at a grand dinner carefully adding a few drops of dark, potent walnut ketchup to his roast beef. This diverse and sometimes bewildering collection of walnut, oyster, and other ketchups marks a pivotal period in the condiment's evolution. It solidified the idea that ketchup was a broad category for concentrated savory and preserved sauces, a fluid definition that was about to encounter its most revolutionary and once controversial ingredient, the tomato. From the peculiar dark world of mushroom and walnut ketchups, you now sense a subtle shift, a hint of something brighter, something that foreshadows the condiment's future as you explore. Fruit ketchup's first appearance. While the tomato was still a controversial outlier, early recipes began to cautiously incorporate other fruits, moving away from purely savory bases and hinting at the sweetness that would eventually define modern ketchup. Imagine the experimentation in those 18th century British kitchens. Cooks, having established that ketchup could be a concentrated sauce from almost any strong-flavored ingredient, naturally looked to fruits that offered both flavor and a degree of natural acidity or pectin to aid in thickening. These weren't intended as desserts. They were still very much savory accompaniments designed to complement meats and rich dishes, but with an unexpected tangy sweetness. You might find a recipe that calls for simmering apples with onions and vinegar, a peculiar early fusion. One of the earliest and most common fruit ketchups, long before the tomato, was gooseberry ketchup. Bim. Gooseberries, tart and plentiful in English gardens, were boiled down with vinegar salt and spices like ginger cloves and mace. The resulting sauce was intensely tangy and slightly sweet-dark in color and intended to be served with rich meats like pork or game. It offered a sharp counterpoint, cutting through fattiness in a way that walnut ketchup might not. You can almost feel the puckering tartness of the gooseberries, a flavor that would awaken a dull meal. Plum ketchup also made an appearance. Plum's particularly tart varieties would be simmered with vinegar and a robust blend of spices, creating a darker, richer sauce with a deeper, more rounded sweetness. This would be a prized accompaniment for roasted fowl or heavier meats, adding a complex layer of fruitiness and spice. These weren't jams or jellies. They were clearly intended as savory condiments, albeit with a fruity base. Historians still argue whether the initial inclusion of fruits in ketchup was driven by a desire for new flavors or simply the practical availability of seasonal produce for preservation. The key distinction here is that these were not sweet sauces. In the modern dessert sense, while they contained natural fruit sugars, these were balanced by a significant amount of vinegar and a medley of savory spices, ensuring they remained firmly in the condiment category. They were tart, tangy, and complex, designed to enhance savory dishes rather than stand alone as a sweet treat. The goal was to provide a concentrated burst of flavor that complemented the main course, not to be slathered on in copious amounts. These fruit ketchups represent an important evolutionary step. They expanded the definition of ketchup beyond fungi and nuts, showing that fruit could also serve as a concentrated savory base. This gradual familiarization with fruit as a component in a savory condiment slowly, subtly paved the way for the eventual momentous and once controversial introduction of the tomato. It was a slow burn, a gradual shift in culinary perception that would eventually lead to the red bottle we know today. As these varied ketchups from mushroom to gooseberry developed, a critical underlying principle remained constant. The quest for preservation. In a world without refrigeration, the very existence of ketchup in all its iterations hinged upon ingenious methods of extending shelf life, primarily through fermentation, high salt content, and crucially liberal amounts of vinegar. Imagine the frustration of a medieval or early modern cook. You've spent hours boiling down ingredients to create a potent, flavorful sauce, only for it to spoil within days or even hours, especially in warmer weather. This constant battle against spoilage drove culinary innovation. Ketchup, in its earliest forms, was a direct response to this challenge, a triumph of rudimentary food science. You can almost feel the urgency to seal and store every precious drop. The initial Asian ketchup, as we've seen, relied on poniard fermentation. This natural process, controlled by salt, broke down the fish proteins and, importantly, created an environment inhospitable to many spoilage-causing bacteria. The resulting high acidity, even before additional vinegar was common, helped to keep the sauce stable for long periods, often years. This was nature's own preservation system, harnessed through centuries of trial and error. As ketchup migrated to Britain and shed its fishy origins, salt and vinegar, became the undisputed champions of preservation. Salt. A valuable commodity, was used in surprisingly high concentrations. It acted as a desiccant, drawing out moisture from the ingredients and creating an environment where most microorganisms simply couldn't thrive. It also added to the intense flavor profile, meaning a little went a long way. You might find recipes instructing you to layer mushrooms with copious amounts of salt to extract their juices before boiling, a clear emphasis on preservation over immediate palatability. Vinegar, however, became the true backbone of British ketchups. Acetic acid, the active component in vinegar, is a powerful antimicrobial agent. By adding significant quantities of vinegar to their boiled-down fruit mushroom or walnut bases, cooks created a highly acidic environment that inhibited bacterial growth. This was a crucial step, allowing ketchups to be bottled and stored at room temperature for extended periods, making them ideal for pantries and long voyages. Imagine the sharp, almost eye-watering tang of pure vinegar as it's added to the simmering concoction, a taste that was synonymous with safety and longevity. Historians still argue whether the British palate's acceptance of such high acidity in condiments was purely for preservation or also a developed taste preference. The process often involved boiling the mixture down to a concentrated syrup. This not only intensified flavors, but also reduced water content, further inhibiting microbial growth. After bottling, the ketchups would sometimes be sealed with a layer of fat or wax or a tightly fitted cork to prevent air from entering and introducing spoilage organisms. These were the ingenious, if somewhat rudimentary, methods that allowed these dark, pungent sauces to travel across oceans and survive in larders for months. So the quest for preservation wasn't just a side note in ketchup's history. It was its very raison d'etre. From fermented fish to vinegar-laden walnuts, every iteration of ketchup was a testament to the ingenuity of cooks battling the relentless forces of spoilage. This fundamental drive for stability laid the groundwork for ketchup's eventual global dominance, a stability that would later become a point of contention and revolution. With the crucial role of preservation firmly established, you now follow ketchup's journey across another vast expanse, the Atlantic Ocean. This brings you to colonial culinary exchange. As ketchup recipes traveled from Britain to America, continuing their remarkable evolution in a new world, brimming with different ingredients and a burgeoning culinary identity. Imagine the sailing ships crossing the turbulent waters, carrying not only people and goods, but also handwritten recipes and culinary ideas. British colonists brought their beloved ketchups with them, the knowledge of mushroom ketchup, walnut ketchup, and even early fruit ketchups. These weren't commercial bottles yet, but rather the tradition of making concentrated savory sauces to enhance meals. You can almost feel the dampness of the sea air clinging to the worn recipe books brought by early settlers. However, the American colonies and later the nascent United States presented a unique set of challenges and opportunities for ketchup. While British immigrants brought their culinary heritage, they also encountered a different array of local produce and a developing, distinct American palate. This new environment meant that ketchup continued to adapt, shedding some of its older European habits and embracing new possibilities. Initially, American versions of ketchup largely mirrored their British counterparts. Mushroom and walnut ketchups were made in colonial homes, using locally available fungi and nuts. The principles of preservation, heavy use of salt and vinegar boiling down to concentrate, remained paramount. These sauces served the same purpose, adding intense flavor to otherwise plain dishes, particularly the abundant wild game or salted meats common in the early American diet. You might find a recipe in a colonial housewife's diary detailing how to make a particularly strong walnut ketchup from the plentiful trees in the New World. Historians still argue whether early American ketchups were primarily influenced by British traditions or developed independently due to similar needs for preservation. But the vast untamed American continent also offered new ingredients. While the British had their gooseberries and plums, America had its own seasonal fruits and vegetables. This natural bounty encouraged further experimentation. Early American cookbooks, which began to emerge in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, show a continued diversification of ketchup types. You'd still find mushroom and walnut recipes, but increasingly other local fruits and even some vegetables started to appear as bases for these concentrated sauces. This transatlantic exchange wasn't just about recipes, it was about a shared culinary problem-solving. Both British and American cooks needed ways to preserve flavors and make bland diets more palatable without refrigeration. The ketchup concept was a perfect fit. However, it was in America that one particular initially controversial ingredient would find its true home in ketchup, eventually eclipsing all others. The stage was being set for the poison apple to make its timid, yet ultimately triumphant, debut. Having followed ketchup's evolving journey across the Atlantic, you now stand on the precipice of its most significant transformation, a moment when a once feared plant finally made its cautious way into the condiment redoubts. Tomato's timid debut. This wasn't an immediate embrace. For decades, the vibrant red fruit was viewed with deep suspicion, making its introduction into ketchup a hesitant and controversial step. Imagine the early 19th century in America. While the British were busy making their mushroom and walnut ketchups, the aromatosat, or love apple, as it was sometimes called, was slowly gaining ground in American gardens, but primarily as an ornamental plant. It was beautiful, undeniably so, with its rich red hue, but for a long time it was considered poisonous by many. So the idea of boiling it down and adding it to a cherished condiment would have been met with considerable skepticism, even outright alarm. You can almost feel the apprehension, the cultural baggage surrounding this bright red fruit. The initial hesitation wasn't entirely unfounded. Tomatoes belong to the Solanaceae family, the nightshade family, which includes deadly plants like belladonna. While the fruit of the tomato plant is safe, its leaves and stems contain toxic alkaloids. In an era without widespread scientific understanding, this botanical kinship, coupled with anecdotal fears and general distrust of unfamiliar produce, led to its ominous reputation. Many people simply refused to eat them, believing they would cause illness or death. Historians still argue whether the fear of tomatoes was primarily due to their nightshade classification or simply their exotic, unfamiliar nature to European settlers. Despite this widespread fear, a few adventurous souls and agriculturalists began to advocate for the tomato's edibility and culinary potential. They experimented with it first as a novelty, then cautiously integrating it into cooking. It was through these early culinary pioneers that the tomato slowly started to shed its dangerous reputation. So, when did this controversial fruit first meet its ketchup destiny? Early recipes for tomato ketchup began to appear in American cookbooks in the very early 19th century, around the 1810s or 1820s. These were not the dominant form of ketchup by any means. They were fringe recipes, often appearing alongside the more traditional mushroom and walnut varieties. They were tentative experiments, a cautious dipping of the toe into the tomato pool. These first tomato ketchups were often quite different from what you'd expect. They were likely thinner, less sweet, and perhaps more intensely vinegary, designed to mask any lingering, poisonous flavor and ensure preservation. They were also often made with a much wider array of spices than modern ketchup, reflecting the earlier British tradition of using strong seasonings to define the condiment. You might find recipes calling for everything from mace and allspice to garlic and onions, all simmered with the tomatoes. The inclusion of the tomato in ketchup was a slow, gradual process, fueled by the adventurousness of a few cooks and the burgeoning agricultural interest in new crops. It marked a quiet revolution, a tentative step towards the condiment's future, even as the poison apple still loomed large in the popular imagination, casting its shadow over dinner tables across the nascent United States. As tomatoes timidly entered the ketchup scene, you realize their journey was hampered by a formidable obstacle: the tomato's bad rap. For centuries across Europe and into America, this now beloved fruit was viewed with deep suspicion, even fear leading to its infamous moniker, the poison apple. Understanding this historical prejudice is key to appreciating its eventual triumph. Imagine a beautiful, plump, vibrant red tomato. To your modern eye, it's a symbol of summer, of freshness, of health. But for centuries, particularly from the 16th to the early 19th, many Europeans and Americans saw it as a harbinger of illness, a plant to be admired from afar, but never consumed. This widespread fear was rooted in a combination of botanical misunderstanding, actual toxic interactions, and general xenophobia towards unfamiliar foods. You can almost hear the whispered warnings from concerned neighbors about eating the deadly nightshade. The primary reason for the tomato's ill repute lay in its botanical lineage. As mentioned, tomatoes belong to the Solanaceae family, the nightshade family, which includes genuinely poisonous plants like belladonna, deadly nightshade, mandrake, and henbane. These plants contain toxic alkaloids that can cause severe illness or death. While the fruit of the tomato plant is safe, its leaves and stems, chotwe, do contain trace amounts of these compounds, particularly in their raw state. In an era without sophisticated botanical knowledge or chemical analysis, it was a reasonable, if ultimately incorrect assumption, that if one part of the family was deadly, all parts and indeed all family members were suspect. Adding to the confusion was the unfortunate reality of mark-and-lead poisoning. Wealthy Europeans often ate off pewter plates which contained high levels of lead. Tomatoes, being highly acidic, would leach lead from the pewter, causing diners to fall ill or even die. The blame tragically fell squarely on the innocent tomato, further cementing its reputation as a poison apple. The poor who ate off wooden trenchers largely escaped this particular interaction and were often among the first to safely experiment with the fruit, though their consumption was rarely documented. Historians still argue whether the lead poisoning incidents or the nightshade association contributed more significantly to the tomato's prolonged fear. The tomato's marquee, exotic origin, also played a role in its distrust. Native to the Americas, it was brought to Europe by explorers and initially regarded with suspicion by conservative palates. New foods, especially those that looked unusual, often faced an uphill battle for acceptance. It was thought to cause inflammatory fevers or even apoplexy. Despite these widespread fears, pockets of adventurous eaters, particularly in Italy and Spain, where the climate was conducive to growing and where the fruit was less associated with poisonous relatives, began to incorporate it into their cuisine. And in America, as we saw, some agriculturalists and curious cooks slowly began to experiment, demonstrating its edibility through personal consumption, paving the way for its hesitant introduction into early ketchups. So the next time you squirt ketchup onto your plate, remember the long, arduous journey of its primary ingredient. The tomato, once feared as a deadly nightshade, had to overcome centuries of bad press, botanical misunderstanding, and accidental poisoning before it could shed its bad rap and finally claim its rightful vibrant red throne in the condiment world. Despite the pervasive fear and the poison apple reputation, the tomato, driven by the adventurous spirit of a few, continued its slow crawl towards acceptance. This brings you to Kraus' early tomato ketchup formulations. The initial, often watery and surprisingly diverse attempts to incorporate this controversial fruit into the beloved condiment, a far cry from the thick, sweet sauce you know today. Imagine the culinary landscape of the early 19th century. If a brave cook decided to tackle the tomato, they weren't working with established guidelines. These early tomato ketchups were largely experimental, varying wildly from kitchen to kitchen and recipe to recipe. The common goal was to boil down the fresh acidic fruit into a concentrated liquid, then preserve it. But the methods and the resulting consistency were often quite different from what modern ketchup has become. You can almost see the steaming pots of reddish liquid bubbling away on cast iron stoves. These initial formulations were generally much thinner and less viscous than modern ketchup. They were more akin to a savory sauce or a thin gravy than a thick condiment designed for dipping. This was partly due to the natural water content of tomatoes and the lack of sophisticated thickening agents. They weren't cooked down to a thick paste. Rather, the focus was on extracting flavor and then preserving the liquid essence. You might pour it from a cruet rather than squeeze it from a bottle. The flavor profile was also distinct. While they certainly had a tomato base, these ketchups were often less sweet and more intensely vinegary or salty than their modern counterparts. Sugar was still a more expensive commodity, and its liberal use in condiments was not yet common. Vinegar, as we've seen, was crucial for preservation and also provided a sharp tang that was highly valued in the era. The tomato's natural acidity was enhanced, not mellowed, by the added vinegar. This created a much sharper, more pungent sauce designed to cut through rich meats rather than complement fries. Historians still argue whether the initial emphasis on vinegar and salt was solely for preservation or also reflected a genuine early American palate preference for sharp flavors. Spice blends in these early tomato ketchups were often complex and varied, reflecting the influence of their British ancestors. You wouldn't just find onion powder and garlic. Recipes commonly called for a medley of malt, cloves, allspice, cinnamon, ginger, mace, nutmeg, and even cayenne pepper. These spices weren't just for flavor. Some were believed to have preservative qualities, while others masked the potentially unpleasant undertones of the raw tomato or helped to distinguish the sauce. The sheer variety of spices meant that no two homemade tomato ketchups were quite alike, each a unique concoction. You might taste a hint of unexpected sweetness from cinnamon, followed by the sharp tang of vinegar. These early tomato ketchups were primarily homemade or produced by small-scale apothecaries and grocers. There was no mass production. Each batch was a labor of love, requiring hours of simmering, straining, and bottling. They were not yet the ubiquitous condiment. They were niche creations slowly gaining traction as the fear of the tomato gradually receded. So as you consider these early, thin, vinegary and spice-laden tomato ketchups, you witness a crucial embryonic stage in the condiment's history. These formulations, though far from the modern product, represented the bold, tentative steps towards integrating the controversial tomato, setting the stage for its eventual undeniable rise to culinary stardom. Having observed the timid, watery beginnings of tomato ketchup, you now bear witness to a pivotal shift in its destiny, one driven by a growing scientific understanding and increasingly successful agriculture. The rise of the tomato. This wasn't merely a change in preferred ingredient. It was a testament to how shifting perceptions and improved cultivation practices finally allowed the poison apple to shed its ominous reputation and claim its rightful place in the culinary sun. Imagine the early to mid-19th century. The fears surrounding the tomato, while persistent, were steadily eroding. This wasn't due to a sudden revelation, but a gradual process of increased familiarity and scientific advocacy. As more people, particularly in the southern United States and certain parts of Europe, began to cultivate and consume tomatoes without immediate ill effect, the anecdotal evidence against them started to crumble. The more often people ate them and lived, the less credible the old superstitions became. You can almost hear the quiet murmurs of reassurance spreading through communities. My neighbor ate it, and they're fine. Crucially, horticulturalists and agricultural reformers played a vital role. They actively promoted the tomato, emphasizing its edibility, its versatility, and its potential as a valuable cash crop. They published articles, gave lectures, and demonstrated its safe consumption, gradually chipping away at centuries of misinformation. These were the unsung heroes of the tomato's public relations campaign, tirelessly advocating for a fruit that was unfairly maligned. Simultaneously, advancements in tomato cultivation made the fruit more accessible and appealing. Varieties were developed that were larger, more robust, and less prone to disease. Improved farming techniques led to more consistent yields, making tomatoes a more reliable and economical ingredient. This increased availability meant that more people had the opportunity to try tomatoes both fresh and cooked, further dispelling the myths. You might see bustling markets filled with piles of ripe red tomatoes, a sight that would have been unthinkable a century prior. Historians still argue whether the development of specific tomato varietals or general improvements in agricultural practices had a greater impact on the fruit's widespread acceptance. The tomato's natural qualities also began to shine. Its vibrant red color was visually appealing, promising freshness and flavor. Its natural acidity made it an excellent base for sauces, and as we'll see, a valuable aid in preservation. And its rich, complex flavor, particularly when cooked, provided a savory depth that was ideal for concentrated condiments. This inherent culinary potential, once overshadowed by fear, was finally being recognized. By the mid-19th century, the tomato was well on its way to becoming a culinary darling. No longer confined to ornamental gardens or the plates of a few brave souls, it was increasingly embraced by home cooks and commercial producers alike. This shift in perception was critical for ketchup. With the tomato now widely accepted as safe and desirable, the stage was set for it to move from a timid experiment to the undisputed star ingredient of the world's most famous condiment, paving the way for a whole new set of challenges related to its mass production and preservation. With the tomato shedding its poisonous reputation and gaining wider acceptance, you now turn to a pivotal figure in its culinary ascent in America: James Meas's influence. This early American horticulturalist and physician played a significant, though perhaps unsung, role in popularizing the tomato and crucially documenting one of the earliest widely circulated recipes for tomato ketchup, helping to solidify its place in the condiment's lineage. Imagine early 19th century Philadelphia, a hub of intellectual and scientific inquiry. Here lived James Meas, 1771 to 1846. A man of many talents, a physician, a naturalist, an agricultural writer, and an avid experimenter. He wasn't a celebrity chef, but his contributions to American agriculture and domestic science were substantial. Meas was one of the early advocates for the tomato, championing its edibility and dispelling the lingering myths of its toxicity. He understood its potential not just as a garden curiosity, but as a valuable food source. You can almost picture him a serious man with spectacles meticulously noting observations in his garden. Mies's most significant contribution to our story came in Bakme, jaar 1812, when he published a recipe for tomato ketchup in his Archives of Useful Knowledge, Vollenbaks to Chambres. This wasn't necessarily the first tomato ketchup recipe ever conceived, as some similar ideas might have been circulating informally or in less widely distributed publications. However, Mies's work was influential. His book, aimed at a general audience interested in practical and scientific knowledge, provided a clear, accessible recipe for making tomato ketchup. This mainstream exposure was crucial in legitimizing the use of tomatoes in a condiment. Historians still argue whether Mies's recipe was truly original or a popularization of existing, lesser-known regional recipes. His recipe, while a landmark, still reflected the early, less refined stage of tomato ketchup. It involved boiling down tomatoes with salt, various spices, often including mace nutmeg, allspice, and pepper, a nod to the earlier British ketchups, and a good amount of vinegar. It was still a relatively thin, dark sauce designed for preservation and as a flavoring agent rather than a thick dipping condiment. It certainly wasn't sweet. Mies himself described it as an excellent sauce for fish or meat, clearly positioning it as a savory accompaniment. You might envision him testing batches in his own kitchen, a scholar turning culinary alchemist. Mies's influence extended beyond just the recipe. As a respected physician and agriculturalist, his endorsement carried weight. His willingness to publish and advocate for the tomato, both as a safe food and as a base for a useful condiment, played a role in gradually eroding public skepticism. He was part of a larger movement that saw science and systematic observation as tools for improving daily life, including what ended up on the dinner table. So as you consider James Mies an unlikely hero in the history of ketchup, you recognize his pivotal role. He was a bridge from the era of fear to the age of acceptance, helping to bring the tomato from the ornamental garden into the kitchen and into the heart of what would become the world's most popular sauce. His recipe marked a significant step in the condiment's slow, undeniable march towards its tomato-dominated future. With James Mies having championed the tomato's entry into ketchup, you now face the next formidable hurdle in its ascent. Preservation challenges. Unlike its fishy mushroom or walnut ancestors, tomato ketchup in its early forms presented unique difficulties in keeping it stable without spoilage, a battle that would ultimately define its industrial future. Imagine a hot, humid American summer day in the mid-19th century. A batch of freshly made tomato ketchup, vibrant red and tangy, sits cooling in a jar. But without proper preservation, within days or even hours, it could start to ferment mold or simply go bad. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a significant economic problem for early commercial producers and a health risk for consumers. The natural acidity of tomatoes, while helpful, wasn't enough on its own. You can almost smell the faint sour tang of spoilage, a smell that meant wasted effort and potential illness. The main culprit was, of course, microorganisms. Bacteria, yeasts, and molds, invisible to the naked eye, thrived in the moist, nutrient-rich environment of tomato pulp. Unlike fish sauce, which was designed around a very specific and controlled fermentation, early tomato ketchups often relied on simply boiling down fresh tomatoes. If not heated sufficiently, or if contaminants entered during bottling, spoilage was inevitable. This led to batch variations, unpredictable shelf life, and a general lack of trust in commercially produced condiments. Historians still argue whether the initial challenges of preserving tomato ketchup were more due to inadequate heating methods or the difficulty of ensuring airtight seals on bottles. Early attempts at preservation relied heavily on the traditional methods: high concentrations of salt and vinegar. Chope. Salt inhibited microbial growth by drawing out moisture, and vinegar's acetic acid created an inhospitable acidic environment. Some recipes called for astonishing amounts of both, resulting in a ketchup that was far saltier and more vinegary than anything you'd encounter today. The taste was sharp pungent and meant to cut through bland food rather than be a harmonious accompaniment. You might feel your mouth pucker just from the thought of such a concentrated flavor. However, even with liberal salt and vinegar, the consistency of early tomato ketchups often posed a problem. They were frequently quite thin, and if not boiled down sufficiently, their higher water content made them more vulnerable to spoilage. Achieving a stable, long-lasting, and thick consistency without modern emulsifiers or highly controlled heating processes was a constant struggle. This fight against spoilage also gave rise to some ethically dubious practices. As commercial production began to ramp up, some unscrupulous manufacturers resorted to adding chemical preservatives, some of which were harmful or even resorted to simply diluting spoiled batches. This adulteration epidemic would become a major problem, eventually leading to consumer outcry and the demand for purer products. So the preservation challenges faced by early tomato ketchup manufacturers were immense. It was a race against time and microscopic organisms, a battle that pushed culinary innovators to seek better methods, better ingredients, and ultimately a safer, more stable product. This struggle against spoilage would ultimately define the future of ketchup, setting the stage for the Industrial Revolution's intervention and the rise of a certain prominent brand. The persistent preservation challenges of early tomato ketchup set the stage for a monumental shift, a transformation driven not by culinary artistry alone, but by the relentless march of progress. The Industrial Revolution's role. This era of unprecedented technological advancement fundamentally reshaped how ketchup was produced, distributed, and consumed, turning it from a homemade or small-batch curiosity into a widely accessible mass-market condiment. Imagine the mid-19th century. Factories are springing up, steam power is transforming manufacturing, and the concept of mass production is taking hold. This industrial fervor extended to food. As urban populations swelled and people moved away from rural self-sufficiency, the demand for commercially prepared shelf-stable foods exploded. Ketchup, with its growing popularity and inherent need for preservation, was ripe for this industrial embrace. You can almost hear the rhythmic clanking of machinery, a new symphony replacing the quiet simmer of a domestic kitchen. One of the most significant impacts was the ability to produce ketchup on an unprecedented scale. No longer were batches limited by the size of a kitchen pot or the number of available hands. Large industrial kettles, mechanical mixers, and eventually automated bottling lines meant that thousands of bottles of ketchup could be produced in the time it once took to make a single one. This sheer volume drastically reduced production costs, making ketchup more affordable and accessible to the average household. It democratized the condiment, moving it from a specialty item to an everyday staple. Historians still argue whether the reduction in labor costs or the expansion of distribution networks had a greater impact on ketchup's widespread availability. Advances in glass manufacturing were also crucial. Stronger, more consistent glass bottles could be produced more cheaply, allowing for better sealing and safer transportation. The development of improved capping and sealing technologies, while still rudimentary by modern standards, helped to create a more airtight seal-reducing spoilage during transit and storage. This was a significant step forward from the simple corks and wax seals of earlier homemade versions. You might see rows upon rows of freshly bottled ketchup gleaming under the factory lights. The Industrial Revolution also brought innovations in our transportation. Railways and steamships could move goods, including bottled ketchup, across vast distances much more quickly and reliably than horse-drawn wagons or sailing ships. This expanded market reach meant that ketchup produced in a factory could be shipped to consumers across the country, turning regional preferences into national trends. It created a demand for a consistent, reliable product, regardless of location. However, this rapid industrialization was not without its drawbacks. The fierce competition and lack of stringent food safety regulations often led to unsavory practices. The drive for cheaper production and longer shelf life, coupled with a booming market, sometimes led to cutting corners, paving the way for the infamous era of adulteration, which would soon become a major headache for consumers and a challenge for conscientious manufacturers. So the Industrial Revolution fundamentally transformed ketchup, taking it from a handmade curiosity to a mass-market commodity. It made ketchup accessible, affordable, and widespread, laying the groundwork for its eventual dominance. But this rapid expansion also created new problems, challenges that would demand radical solutions and lead to the rise of figures who would fight for purity and consistency in the burgeoning food industry. The rapid industrialization of ketchup production, while making the condiment widely accessible, also unleashed a dark period in its history. The adulteration epidemic. In the cutthroat competition of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, unscrupulous manufacturers often resorted to shocking and sometimes dangerous practices to cut costs, prolong shelf life, and make their products appear more appealing, much to the detriment of public health. Imagine walking into a grocery store in the late 1800s. You pick up a bottle of ketchup, assuming it's made simply from tomatoes, vinegar, and spices. But what you might be buying was a cocktail of questionable ingredients. The lack of stringent food safety regulations meant that manufacturers could get away with adding almost anything to their products without penalty. This was an era where quantity and cheapness often trumped quality and safety. You can almost feel the pervasive distrust in the air, the silent worry about what was really in your food. One of the most common forms of adulteration involved dilution and fillers. To stretch expensive ingredients like tomatoes, manufacturers would add cheaper substitutes. This could include pumpkin pulp apple pomades, what's left after pressing apples for cider, or even starch to thicken a watery product. These weren't necessarily harmful in themselves, but they were deceptive, cheating the consumer of genuine tomato content. More concerning were the fillers used to bulk up spices like groundnut shells or even sawdust. Far more alarming were the chemical preservatives. Faced with the challenge of keeping tomato ketchup stable and bright red for long periods without refrigeration, many companies turned to powerful, often toxic chemicals. Formaldehyde, salicylic acid, and borax were sometimes used to prevent spoilage and fermentation. These chemicals, while effective at killing bacteria, were harmful to human health, causing digestive upset headaches, and worse. The irony was that a product meant to add flavor could simultaneously be poisoning consumers. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of harmful chemical preservatives was primarily due to ignorance of their long-term effects or a deliberate disregard for public health in pursuit of profit. Color was another major area of deceit. As ketchup became associated with a vibrant red hue, manufacturers used artificial dyes to enhance its appearance, often to mask low-quality pale tomatoes or to give diluted products a more appealing color. These dyes were often coal tar derivatives, some of which were carcinogenic or contained heavy metals. A bright red bottle of ketchup might look appetizing, but its color could be hiding a multitude of sins beneath the surface. You might picture a factory worker casually stirring a bright, unnatural red powder into a vat of pale tomato pulp. This adulteration epidemic led to widespread public outcry, fueled by investigative journalists and early food safety advocates. Consumers were sick of buying products that spoiled quickly, tasted awful, or made them ill. This public dissatisfaction would become a powerful force for change, paving the way for landmark food safety legislation and the rise of manufacturers who championed purity and transparency. So, the era of adulteration cast a long, dark shadow over the burgeoning ketchup industry. It was a period where profit often overshadowed public health, leading to a product that was widespread but often dangerously compromised. This crisis of trust would ultimately lead to a revolution in ketchup production, spearheaded by a name you know very well. Against the murky backdrop of the adulteration epidemic, the nascent commercial ketchup market was slowly but surely beginning to form, with a few early brands making their mark particularly in Britain. You now encounter names like Harvey's and Crossy and Blackwell, influential early British ketchup brands that shaped consumer expectations long before the red tomato-centric variety truly took hold. Imagine the shelves of a well-stocked British grocer in the mid-19th century. You wouldn't find a single iconic red bottle. Instead, you'd see a diverse array of dark, often slender bottles, labeled with names that hinted at their contents or origins. These were the early standard-bearers of commercial ketchup, carrying on the tradition of mushroom walnut and other savory non-tomato concentrates that were still hugely popular in Britain. You can almost feel the weight of these heavy glass bottles, promising potent flavor. Harvey's sauce. For instance, established in the late 18th century, was a celebrated British condiment. While not strictly a ketchup in name, its function and composition were very similar to the early savory ketchups. It was a complex dark sauce rumored to contain anchovies, mushrooms, walnuts, soy, and various spices all steeped in vinegar and matured. It was a highly concentrated flavor enhancer used sparingly to enrich gravies, stews, and roasted meats. Its enduring popularity for decades demonstrates the prevailing British preference for robust, savory condiments over anything sweet or distinctly tomato-based. You might see a cook carefully pouring a few drops of Harvey's from an elegant bottle, a sign of refined taste. Then came Cross and Blackwell, a prominent British food manufacturer founded in 1706 and later renowned for its pickles, jams, and sauces. By the mid-19th century, they were producing a variety of ketchups, including mushroom and walnut. Their products were known for their quality and consistency, building a reputation for reliability in a market often plagued by adulteration. They were among the larger-scale producers, contributing to the wider availability of bottled ketchups in British homes and abroad. Their presence signified a more professional, albeit still pre-tomato approach to ketchup manufacturing. Historians still argue whether the dominance of these British brands inadvertently delayed the widespread acceptance of tomato ketchup in the UK compared to America. These British brands were crucial in establishing the concept of a commercially bottled condiment tea, a ready-made shelf-stable sauce that offered convenience to the home cook. They proved that there was a market for concentrated flavorings that didn't require laborious homemade preparation. Their success paved the way for larger-scale production and more sophisticated manufacturing processes, even if their specific ingredients were destined to be eclipsed. It's important to remember that during this period, British taste still favored the pungent vinegary and savory over the sweet. Tomato, while gaining traction in America, remained a secondary player, if present at all, in the main lines of these established British brands. The British ketchup market was a distinct entity, following its own evolutionary path, even as whispers of the love apple began to travel across the Atlantic. So, as you glance at the historical bottles of Harvey's and Cross and Blackwell, you understand that they represent a vital, albeit often forgotten chapter in ketchup's story. They were the early titans of commercial condiment production, laying the groundwork for mass consumption and setting the stage for the true revolution that would soon arrive from across the pond, brought by a man obsessed with purity and the perfect tomato. Having glimpsed the British landscape of early commercial ketchups, your attention now shifts to the American scene, where a truly transformative force was about to change the condiment world forever. You are about to witness a pivotal moment. Heinz enters the fray, marking the arrival of the brand that would not only dominate the market, but fundamentally redefine what ketchup was and what it could be. Imagine the bustling, ambitious atmosphere of late 19th century America. Industries were booming, and food processing was rapidly expanding. It was in this fertile ground that Henry John Heinz, 1844–1941, began his remarkable journey. Though his company started with horseradish and pickles, Heinz quickly saw the potential in the burgeoning condiment market. He was a visionary, a meticulous businessman, and crucially for our story, a man deeply concerned with purity and quality in an era rife with food adulteration. You can almost feel the entrepreneurial spirit crackle in the air around him. By the succeed 1870s. Heinz was already a significant player in the pickle and condiment business. It was around this time that he turned his attention to tomato ketchup. At this point, tomato ketchup was still a relatively new product compared to its mushroom and walnut cousins, and its quality and consistency varied wildly. This was the landscape Heinz stepped into, a market with great potential, but also significant problems related to spoilage and deceptive practices. Heinz's initial approach wasn't necessarily revolutionary in terms of ingredients. His early ketchups still used tomatoes, vinegar, and spices. However, his obsession with purity and hygiene set him apart. In an industry where diluted products, artificial colors, and harmful preservatives were common, Heinz made a conscious decision to champion quality. He believed that consumers would pay a premium for a product they could trust, a bold stance in an era where cheaper, often adulterated goods flooded the market. Historians still argue whether Heinz's commitment to purity was primarily a moral stance or a shrewd business strategy in a competitive and unregulated industry. One of Heinz's earliest and most impactful innovations was his insistence on transparent glass bottles. This might seem trivial now, but at a time when many commercial food products were sold in opaque jars or tins that could hide inferior ingredients, Heinz deliberately chose clear glass. This was a direct challenge to his competitors, a visual declaration of his product's purity. "You can see what you're buying" was the implicit message, a powerful statement of trust and quality. You might picture a Heinz salesman proudly displaying a gleaming clear bottle of his ketchup next to a competitor's murky, opaque offering. This commitment to transparency and quality, even in the chaotic, unregulated market of the late 19th century, began to build Heinz's reputation. He wasn't just selling ketchup, he was selling confidence. This focus on purity, combined with his shrewd marketing tactics and relentless pursuit of consistency, would ultimately propel Heinz to the forefront of the condiment industry. He was about to embark on a crusade for purity that would forever change the ketchup we know and love. Having seen Heinz step onto the scene with his revolutionary commitment to transparency, you now delve deeper into what truly set him apart. H.J. Heinz's vision. His approach wasn't just about making a better product, it was about transforming an entire industry through an unwavering dedication to quality hygiene and consumer trust, effectively revolutionizing ketchup production and its public perception. Imagine Henry J. Heinz himself, a man driven by an almost evangelical zeal for purity. He wasn't content with merely selling food, he wanted to elevate the standard of the entire industry. His philosophy, summed up in his famous slogan, 57 varieties, though he had more, was built on a foundation of quality ingredients, hygienic manufacturing, and transparent business practices. This was a radical stance in a time when many competitors saw food processing as a way to cut corners and hide impurities. You can almost see him walking through his spotless factories, a stern but determined figure. One of Heinz's most significant contributions was his relentless focus on sanitation and hygiene. While other factories might be dark, dirty, and unsanitary, Heinz invested heavily in clean facilities. His factories were pristine, with workers dressed in clean uniforms and machinery regularly scrubbed. He even offered public tours of his plants, inviting consumers to witness the cleanliness firsthand. This transparency was a direct counter to the widespread fear of contaminated food and the secretive practices of his rivals. It was a brilliant marketing move, transforming public skepticism into trust. Historians still argue whether Heinz's commitment to hygiene was primarily a response to public health concerns or a strategic differentiator in a competitive market. Beyond cleanliness, Heinz was obsessed with ingredient quality. Chew. He didn't just use any tomatoes, he worked with farmers to cultivate specific varieties that were rich in flavor and color. He insisted on using high-quality vinegar and spices, refusing to compromise on raw materials, even if it meant higher costs. This meticulous attention to sourcing meant his ketchup started with a superior base, which was crucial for its eventual flavor and stability. You might picture him personally inspecting fields of ripe red tomatoes, selecting only the finest. Furthermore, Heinz understood the importance of consistency. Chot. Every bottle of Heinz ketchup had to taste and perform exactly the same batch after batch, year after year. This reliability built brand loyalty, convincing consumers that they could always trust the Heinz name. This level of consistency was incredibly difficult to achieve in an era of rudimentary technology and natural variations in ingredients, but Heinz's rigorous processes made it possible. H.J. Heinz was more than just a food manufacturer. He was a pioneer in consumer advocacy. He actively campaigned for stricter food purity laws, even testifying before Congress in favor of the PAR's Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. This act, which prohibited the sale of adulterated or misbranded food and drugs, was a landmark piece of legislation, and Heinz's advocacy for it cemented his reputation as a champion of public health and honest business. So H.J. Heinz's vision wasn't just about making ketchup, it was about setting a new standard for the entire food industry. His unwavering commitment to purity, hygiene, and consistency not only elevated his brand to global dominance, but also fundamentally shaped consumer expectations for food quality, forever changing the way ketchup was made and perceived. He was about to take on one of the biggest debates in food preservation, the use of controversial chemical additives. Having established H.J. Heinz's unwavering commitment to purity, you now witness his most defining battle, one that profoundly shaped the future of his ketchup and, indeed, the entire American food industry beam. The sodium benzoate battle. This was a fierce public showdown over the use of chemical preservatives, a fight that Heinz personally led, ultimately advocating for a product preserved through natural means. Imagine the early 20th century, a time of intense debate over food additives. While many manufacturers, as we saw, liberally used chemical preservatives like formaldehyde, salicylic acid, and sodium benzoate to prevent spoilage and extend shelf life, a growing number of scientists and food reformers, led by figures like Dr. Harvey Wiley, the father of the Pure Food and Drug Act, argued vehemently against their use. These chemicals were cheap and effective, but their long-term health effects were often unknown or actively suppressed. You can almost feel the tension in the air, the public torn between convenience and safety. Sodium benzoate was a particularly common preservative in ketchup. It was effective at preventing fermentation and discoloration, allowing manufacturers to use cheaper, often inferior ingredients and process them quickly without fear of spoilage. However, Heinz took a strong stand against it. He believed that if a product was made with high-quality ripe ingredients and processed properly, chemical preservatives were unnecessary and potentially harmful. This wasn't just a philosophical stance, it was a huge business gamble. Removing sodium benzoate meant his ketchup had to be fundamentally better processed, more carefully, and bottled more effectively. Historians still argue whether Heinz's initial motivation for rejecting sodium benzoate was purely ethical or a strategic move to differentiate his product in a crowded market. Heinz's solution to the sodium benzoate problem was ingenious and relied on a combination of factors. 1. Higher quality tomatoes. He insisted on using only the ripest, reddest tomatoes, which naturally contain higher levels of acid and pectin, contributing to both flavor and natural preservation. 2. Increased vinegar content. Heinz significantly increased the amount of vinegar in his ketchup. The acetic acid in vinegar is a powerful natural preservative, effectively inhibiting bacterial growth. This gave his ketchup a distinct tangy bite, but also ensured its stability. 3. More sugar. While later a defining characteristic, adding more sugar early on wasn't just for taste. Sugar in high concentrations also acts as a preservative by binding water, making it unavailable to microorganisms. 4. Sterilization and hygiene. His rigorous emphasis on clean factories, sterilized bottles, and thorough cooking processes ensured that spoilage-causing bacteria were eliminated before bottling. This commitment to preservative-free ketchup was a cornerstone of Heinz's marketing. He actively promoted his product as pure food and free from all artificial preservatives, distinguishing himself sharply from competitors. This resonated deeply with a public increasingly concerned about food safety and the murky practices of the industry. The successful passage of the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, which regulated the use of such chemicals, further vindicated Heinz's stance and helped establish his brand as a symbol of trust. So the sodium benzoate battle was more than just a fight over an additive. It was a defining moment for H.J. Heinz and for the food industry. His victory cemented his reputation as a champion of purity and ultimately led to the formulation of modern ketchup, Tangier Sweeter, and naturally preserved a product that would conquer the world. With H.J. Heinz's victory in the sodium benzoate battle, the blueprint for modern tomato ketchup truly solidified. You now gain a deeper understanding of the crucial interconnected roles played by two key ingredients that moved beyond mere flavoring agents to become the very pillars of ketchup's identity and stability. The role of vinegar and sugar. Imagine the transformation of ketchup from its earliest, sometimes bland forms to the vibrant, tangy, and sweet condiment we know today. This wasn't just about adding more of these ingredients. It was about understanding their synergistic power in creating a product that was not only delicious, but also remarkably shelf-stable without artificial preservatives. You can almost taste the perfect balance of tang and sweetness, a carefully engineered flavor profile. Vinegar. Acetic acid became the unsung hero of natural preservation. Heinz, in his quest for purity, recognized that a sufficiently high level of acidity was critical to inhibit the growth of spoilage-causing bacteria, yeasts, and molds. By increasing the vinegar content, he effectively created an environment hostile to microorganisms. This also contributed significantly to ketchup's characteristic tang dar, that sharp mouth-watering quality that balances the sweetness and savory notes. It's the zing that makes ketchup so appealing as a condiment cutting through the richness of fried foods or meats. You might picture the immense vats of vinegar in the Heinz factories, a clear, potent liquid safeguarding every batch. Sugar, on the other hand, played a dual role. While it certainly contributed to the increasingly sweet profile that would define American ketchup, it was also a vital false preservative ponchich. In high concentrations, sugar acts as a humectant, binding the water molecules in the ketchup and making them unavailable for microbial growth. This effectively dehydrated the microorganisms, preventing them from multiplying and spoiling the product. The combination of high acidity from vinegar and high sugar content created a powerful 1-2 punch against spoilage, allowing ketchup to be stored at room temperature for extended periods. Historians still argue whether the increased sugar content in American ketchup was a result of its preservative qualities or primarily driven by an evolving consumer preference for sweeter condiments. This carefully balanced interplay between vinegar and sugar was a stroke of culinary genius and scientific understanding, even if the precise mechanisms weren't fully articulated at the time. It allowed Heinz to produce a ketchup that was both safe and consistently delicious without resorting to the chemical preservatives that plagued his competitors. The more vinegar and sugar he added, the more stable the product became, leading to a consistently reliable product that consumers could trust. The increasing presence of sugar also played a crucial role in shaping the evolving American palate, moving away from the purely savory, salty, and pungent ketchups of the past towards a preference for sweeter, more rounded flavors. This shift was gradual but profound, establishing a taste profile that would eventually conquer the world. So the next time you squirt ketchup onto your plate, remember that the vibrant tang and comforting sweetness are not just about flavor. They are the twin pillars of its natural preservation, the ingenious solution that allowed ketchup to shed its chemical past and become the safe, stable, and ubiquitous condiment it is today. This balance of acid and sugar was a key factor in Bubductin, the great taste shift that was about to fully unfold. With the scientific alchemy of vinegar and sugar now ensuring ketchup's purity and stability, you observe a parallel, equally profound evolution: the great taste shift. The American palate, increasingly influenced by convenience and new flavor profiles, began to favor a distinctly sweeter Tangier version of ketchup, diverging sharply from its savory, pungent European ancestors and laying the groundwork for its global dominance. Imagine the Victorian era where strong savory flavors reigned supreme, where a ketchup could be a dark, earthy mushroom concentrate or a bitter walnut essence. Now fast forward to the early 20th century in America, a new generation more accustomed to processed foods, and the growing availability of sugar was emerging. Their taste buds were subtly yet fundamentally recalibrating. The sharp, bracing tang of purely vinegary ketchups, while still present, was increasingly balanced and then eventually overshadowed by a rising tide of sweetness. You can almost feel the shift on your tongue from a pucker to a gentle, comforting sweetness. Several factors contributed to this taste shift. Firstly, sugar mustachino was becoming more affordable and widely available due to improved cultivation and refining processes. This made it a cost-effective ingredient for food manufacturers who could use it liberally to appeal to a broader market. Sweetness is a universally appealing flavor, especially to children, and incorporating more sugar-made ketchup instantly more palatable to a wider demographic. Secondly, the rise of mass-produced, often bland foods created a need for condiments that could provide a quick, accessible burst of flavor. Think of the proliferation of hot dogs, hamburgers, and French fries, foods that benefit immensely from a bright, sweet, and tangy counterpoint. The strong, almost medicinal taste of older ketchups didn't quite fit this new culinary landscape. A sweeter, more approachable sauce was needed to make these new convenience foods truly shine. Historians still argue whether the demand for sweeter condiments drove the increased use of sugar, or if the increased availability of sugar simply made sweeter products more feasible. Thirdly, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 ironically also played a role. By banning harmful chemical preservatives, it forced manufacturers like Heinz to rely more heavily on natural preservatives like vinegar and sugar. As we discussed, higher concentrations of both were needed for stability. While vinegar added tang, sugar added balance and appeal, creating the characteristic sweet and sour profile that became synonymous with modern ketchup. The need for stability inadvertently shaped the flavor. This great taste shift wasn't instantaneous. It was a gradual evolution. But by the mid-20th century, the American preference for a distinctly sweet, tangy, and vibrantly red tomato ketchup was firmly established. It was a flavor profile perfectly suited to a new era of casual dining fast food and convenience. This uniquely American interpretation of ketchup, refined through decades of experimentation and market demand, was now poised to conquer the world, carrying its sweet and tangy banner across every continent. With the American palate firmly embracing a sweeter Tangier ketchup, you now witness the condiment's ultimate triumph. Ketchup's global spread. Pho. From its humble origins as a fermented fish sauce transformed through British ingenuity and American purity, the vibrant red tomato ketchup conquered palates across continents, becoming one of the most recognizable and ubiquitous condiments on Earth. Imagine the post-World War II era, an age of increasing globalization and American cultural influence. As American soldiers' ideas and products spread across the world, so too did its iconic condiment. Ketchup wasn't just a sauce, it was for many a taste of America, a symbol of modernity and convenience. You can almost see the iconic Heinz Keystone label appearing in grocery stores and restaurants from Tokyo to Berlin, becoming a familiar sight in increasingly diverse culinary landscapes. Several factors propelled this global takeover. Firstly, American economic and cultural dominance. In the mid-20th century was immense. As American fast food chains, particularly McDonald's, began their international expansion, ketchup came along for the ride. It was an essential accompaniment to fries and burgers, universally understood and instantly recognizable. The consistent quality and flavor of major brands like Heinz meant that no matter where you were, you could expect the same familiar taste. This created an instant demand for the product in new markets. Secondly, ketchup's versatility made it adaptable to various cuisines. While initially associated with American fast food, its sweet, tangy, and umami-rich profile proved surprisingly complementary to a wide range of dishes. It could be used as a dipping sauce, a cooking ingredient, or a flavor enhancer bridging cultural divides. You might find it used to thicken a stew in Europe or as a base for a stir-fry sauce in Asia, a testament to its chameleon-like adaptability. Historians still argue whether ketchup's global spread was primarily driven by its association with American culture or its inherent flavor profile's broad appeal. Thirdly, the Jauchtmar, stability and shelf life. Of modern ketchup perfected through the sodium benzoate battle and the optimal balance of vinegar and sugar made it ideal for global distribution. It could withstand long voyages and varied climates without spoiling, ensuring a consistent product reached consumers around the world. This logistical reliability was crucial for building a global brand. The sheer power of Schichtgurt marketing and branding also played a massive role. Companies like Heinz invested heavily in advertising, making their iconic bottle and signature taste synonymous with ketchup itself. The brand became a household name recognized and trusted globally, often eclipsing local condiments or the memory of ketchup's diverse origins. So, from a niche Asian fish sauce to a myriad of European experiments, ketchup found its true global destiny through the American tomato and the power of industrialization. It's now a ubiquitous presence, a red dot on plates in almost every corner of the world, a testament to a culinary journey that started with a pungent brine and ended with a sweet, tangy, universally beloved condiment. Its next conquest would be the very fast food industry it helped to shape. With American ketchup now a global phenomenon, you come to understand its inseparable relationship with a culinary revolution that swept the 20th century. The fast food connection. This wasn't just a happy coincidence. Ketchup, with its unique flavor profile and practical attributes, was perfectly poised to become the indispensable partner to the rise of quick casual dining, fundamentally shaping the way millions eat today. Imagine the post-war boom, the rise of the automobile, and the burgeoning American suburbs. This new lifestyle demanded convenience and fast food delivered. Think of the drive-ins, the roadside diners, and eventually the iconic Golden Arches. What was the perfect accompaniment to the ubiquitous hamburger and, more importantly, the French fry enter ketchup? You can almost smell the blend of sizzling fat and sweet, tangy tomato that defined this new era of eating. Ketchup's appeal to the fast food industry was multifaceted. Firstly, its gourmet's flavor profile was a perfect match. The sweet, tangy, and slightly acidic notes of modern tomato ketchup cut through the richness of fried foods, offering a refreshing contrast that cleansed the palate and encouraged more eating. It provided a much-needed flavor boost to often simple, sometimes bland, mass-produced items. A plain burger or a handful of fries truly comes alive with a dollop of ketchup. Historians still argue whether fast food's rise primarily created the demand for ketchup or if ketchup's widespread appeal helped fuel fast food's growth. Secondly, ketchup was incredibly economical and scalable. Its stable shelf life and mass production capabilities meant it could be produced cheaply in vast quantities, transported easily, and stored without refrigeration, making it ideal for high-volume, low-cost operations. Restaurants could buy it in bulk, and consumers could use it liberally without breaking the bank. This economic efficiency made it the perfect condiment for a business model built on speed and affordability. You might picture immense industrial-sized containers of ketchup being delivered to a bustling fast food kitchen. Thirdly, its optic consistency was paramount. No matter which fast food restaurant you visited or which bottle of Heinz you picked up, the taste and texture of ketchup were reliably the same. This predictability was crucial for a nascent industry that prized uniformity and a standardized customer experience. People knew exactly what they were getting, fostering trust and loyalty. Finally, ketchup's ease of use and portability sealed its fate. The squeeze bottle, a later innovation but perfectly suited to fast food, made it simple for customers to self-serve. The small individual packets, another brilliant innovation, allowed for convenient mess-free consumption on the go, whether in a car or at a picnic table. Ketchup became an essential part of the fast food ritual, a familiar and comforting presence wherever casual meals were consumed. You can almost feel the satisfying squirt from a classic glass bottle, a quintessential fast food moment. So the fast food connection wasn't just a fleeting trend, it was a symbiotic relationship that propelled both industries to global dominance. Ketchup provided the perfect flavor and practical solution for the fast food revolution, becoming an indispensable part of a new way of eating that continues to shape our culinary landscape. From its undeniable partnership with the fast food industry, you might assume ketchup's story ends with the familiar red bottle. But its evolution continues, branching out and demonstrating its enduring adaptability as you explore. Beyond the red bottle. Find modern culinary trends, a renewed interest in artisanal products, and a global palate seeking new sensations have led to a fascinating proliferation of alternative ketchups. Imagine walking through a gourmet grocery store today or browse a menu at a trendy restaurant. While the iconic red Heinz bottle still holds pride of place, you'll increasingly encounter a surprising array of ketchups that harken back to its diverse origins or push its boundaries in entirely new directions. This isn't just about different brands, it's about a reimagining of what ketchup can be. You might spot a bottle of a vibrant green or deep purple sauce instantly recognizable as a ketchup, yet utterly different from the classic tomato. One significant trend is the resurgence of youthful, artisanal, and gourmet ketchups. Chefs and small batch producers are experimenting with unique flavor profiles, often using heirloom tomato varieties, organic sugars, and complex spice blends. They might incorporate smoked paprika chipotle peppers for a smoky kick, or even less common spices like star anise or cardamom, creating a more sophisticated and nuanced sauce than the mass-produced versions. This is a deliberate move towards craft and quality, akin to the craft beer movement. You can almost taste the richer, deeper tomato flavor enhanced by carefully selected ingredients. Another fascinating development is the return of non-tomato ketchups, echoing its historical roots. You might find beet ketchup, leveraging the earthy sweetness and vibrant color of beets, often with a tangy vinegar base, offering a deep, almost purple hue and a distinctly different flavor profile. Carrot ketchup. Utilizing the natural sweetness of carrots, often spiced with ginger or turmeric, resulting in a sunny orange condiment. Banana ketchup. Particularly popular in the Philippines, this sweet and tangy bright red ketchup is made from bananas, sugar vinegar, and spices, demonstrating a tropical adaptation of the classic. Spicy ketchups. Infused with various chilies from jalapenos to habaneros, offering levels of heat that were rarely part of the original family-friendly formula. These alternatives are not just about novelty, they represent a contemporary culinary exploration, a playful re-engagement with ketchup's incredibly broad definition. They acknowledge its history as a versatile concentrated sauce, rather than limiting it to a single tomato-based identity. They also cater to diverse dietary needs, offering options that might be lower in sugar, organic, or made with specific regional ingredients. Historians still argue whether this modern diversification of ketchup is a genuine culinary evolution or simply a cyclical return to historical varieties for nostalgic or niche markets. So, while the red bottle remains a titan, the world of ketchup is far more expansive than it might seem. From gourmet artisanal blends to vibrant vegetable and fruit alternatives, the condiment continues to evolve, demonstrating its enduring appeal and surprising adaptability, proving that sometimes the best way forward is to look back at the origins of a seemingly simple sauce. Beyond the fascinating array of flavors and forms, you now recognize that ketchup has transcended its humble origins to become something truly profound. Ketchup as a cultural icon. It's not just a sauce, it's a symbol, a ubiquitous presence woven into the fabric of daily life, recognizable across generations and continents, often eliciting strong emotions and memories. Imagine a kitchen, a diner, a picnic, or a barbecue anywhere in the Western world, and a vibrant red bottle immediately springs to mind. Ketchup is instantly recognizable. Its shape, its color, its familiar label particularly. Heinz's Keystone logo ingrained in our collective consciousness. It is a symbol of American comfort food, a universal accompaniment to childhood meals, and an undeniable marker of casual dining. You can almost feel the reassuring weight of the bottle in your hand, a familiar comfort. Its iconic status stems from several factors. Firstly, it's its sheer ubiquity. Ketchup is practically everywhere food is served, from Michelin-starred restaurants, sometimes in a playful, ironic context, to humble hot dog stands. This constant presence has made it a default condiment, almost an expectation. If fries are served, ketchup is assumed. This sheer pervasiveness elevates it beyond mere food to a cultural fixture. Secondly, its association with childhood and nostalgia. For many, the taste and smell of ketchup evoke powerful memories of family meals, birthday parties, and school lunches. It's a comforting, familiar flavor tied to innocent days and simple pleasures. This emotional connection makes it more than just a sauce. It's a taste of home, a culinary touchstone that resonates across generations. You might catch a fleeting memory of your own childhood, a specific meal, and a dollop of red sauce. Historians still argue whether ketchup's emotional resonance stems primarily from its widespread availability during childhood or its consistent, unchanging flavor profile across decades. Thirdly, ketchup has become a symbol of American culture and, by extension, globalized cuisine. Its rise to dominance alongside fast food cemented its image as an American export, an accessible taste of the United States that traveled the world. In many countries, ketchup is synonymous with tomato ketchup, and often specifically Heinz. It's a culinary ambassador, however simple. The language we use also reflects its iconic status. Phrases like ketchup and fries are inseparable. Debates about how to store it fridge or cupboard or whether to put it on a hot dog, a surprisingly contentious issue for some, demonstrate its deep cultural penetration. It's a condiment that sparks conversations, opinions, and even passionate arguments. So, from its humble, fishy beginnings through its bizarre transformations, ketchup has emerged as a true cultural icon. It's more than just a collection of ingredients. It's a flavor of home, a symbol of an era, and a silent yet powerful testament to the ever-evolving story of what we eat and how we define our culinary world. Its pervasive presence is in itself a strange and wonderful legacy. Having recognized ketchup's status as a cultural icon, you now turn to a more scientific explanation for its pervasive appeal. The umami factor. This fifth basic taste, relatively recently acknowledged in Western culinary science, holds the secret to why ketchup is so deeply satisfying and addictive. A perfect storm of flavor that transcends mere sweetness, sourness, or saltiness. Imagine your taste buds' tiny receptors on your tongue encountering the complex symphony of ketchup. You immediately identify sweetness from sugar tang from vinegar and saltiness from well salt. But there's another layer, a deep savory richness that provides a profound sense of satisfaction, making you crave more. This is umami-su. Often described as a savory, meaty, or brothy taste, it's the flavor of glutamate, an amino acid, and certain nucleotides naturally occurring compounds that signal protein and ripeness. You can almost feel that elusive yet intensely satisfying savory depth on your palate. The historical trajectory of ketchup from its fishy origins to its tomato-based dominance is essentially a relentless pursuit of umami. The original Asian Ketchup made from fermented fish was an umami powerhouse. The long fermentation process broke down fish proteins into abundant free glutamates, creating an intensely savory brine. When British cooks adapted it, they sought out other umami-rich ingredients. Mushrooms, which are naturally high in glutamate, and walnuts, which develop savory notes when processed. These were early intuitive attempts to replicate that deep, satisfying savoriness. Historians still argue whether the historical shift from fish to mushrooms was a conscious pursuit of umami or simply an accidental discovery based on local availability. When the tomato finally entered the picture, it provided another potent source of umami. Ripe tomatoes are naturally rich in glutamate, as tomatoes ripen their glutamate levels increase, and when they are cooked down and concentrated as they are in ketchup, that umami flavor becomes even more pronounced. This is why a rich tomato sauce can feel so deeply satisfying even without meat. The combination of ripe tomatoes cooked down to concentrate their natural glutamates, along with the added savory notes from spices like onion and garlic powder, creates a formidable umami bomb in modern ketchup. Beyond the umami, ketchup also masterfully balances the other four basic tastes. Sweetness, from sugar. Sourness, from vinegar and the tomato's natural acidity. Saltiness, from well salt. Bitterness, in very subtle balancing amounts from some spices. This incredible balance, combined with the powerful umami, creates a flavor profile that is uniquely appealing. It hits all the right notes on your palate, creating a sensation of completeness and deep satisfaction. This is what makes ketchup so versatile and, frankly, so addictive for many. So the next time you find yourself reaching for that bottle of ketchup, remember that its deliciousness isn't just a happy accident. It's the culmination of centuries of culinary evolution driven by an unconscious yet relentless quest for the elusive fifth taste umami. It's a scientific explanation for a cultural phenomenon revealing the hidden genius behind this seemingly simple sauce. Having peeled back the scientific layer of umami, you now cast your gaze back to the forgotten chapters of ketchup's story, acknowledging its unsung ancestors. In our collective memory, modern ketchup is a purely tomato-based sweet and tangy sauce, yet its lineage stretches far beyond that, including a surprising cast of characters that once bore the name ketchup and shaped its very evolution. Imagine sitting down for a meal and being offered a dark, thin, savory sauce labeled ketchup that smells faintly of brine and sea. This was the original 17th century fish ketchup, or K-chap. It was a potent fermented essence of fish and salt, an umami powerhouse born of necessity in Southeast Asia. While a distant memory to most today, it was the very first spark, the progenitor that set the entire culinary journey in motion. It's a reminder that great innovations often begin in unexpected places with humble, practical roots. You can almost feel the salty spray of the Asian coast, even in this imagined moment. Then consider its British descendants, the dominant forms of ketchup for well over a century. The mushroom ketchups. Dark and earthy, made from boiled-down fungi, provided a deep, savory umami flavor that stood in stark contrast to the modern version. And the walnut ketchups. Often made from unripe green walnuts, offered a pungent, slightly bitter and robust alternative. These were not mere curiosities. They were staples prized for their ability to add depth to meats and gravies. They carried the name, the function, and the concentration of the original long before the tomato was even considered a safe food. Historians still argue whether the culinary influence of these early ketchups completely faded or subtly shaped later European and American tastes for savory condiments. Even the earlier fruit ketchups made from gooseberries or plums, often tangy and spiced, represent a crucial forgotten bridge. They introduced the idea of fruit as a base for a savory condiment, paving the way for the tomato's eventual, albeit controversial, entry. These weren't jams. They were firmly in the savory realm, albeit with a fruity twist. They show a constant spirit of experimentation, a willingness to mold the ketchup concept around whatever ingredients were locally available and could be preserved. These unsung ancestors remind us that the history of food is rarely linear. It's a complex tapestry of adaptation, innovation, and forgotten paths. The modern ketchup we know is not a sudden invention, but the culmination of centuries of culinary trial and error, a process of shedding and adopting ingredients driven by necessity, changing tastes and technological advancements. So, as you reflect on the long winding road that led to the red bottle in your fridge, give a silent nod to the fish mushrooms and walnuts. They were the unsung heroes, the forgotten pioneers, who tirelessly worked to define and refine the condiment we now take for granted. Their contributions ensured that the concept of ketchup survived and evolved, setting the stage for its final enduring mystery. Having explored ketchup's surprising origins, its many transformations, and its unsung ancestors, you arrive at its concluding mystery. The enduring mystery. How has a sauce with such a varied, sometimes bizarre past managed to become one of the most universally beloved and consistently evolving condiments on the planet? Its story isn't over. It's a continuous evolution still full of subtle shifts and enduring appeal. Imagine the sheer improbability of it. A fermented fish sauce from ancient Asia journeying across oceans, shedding its fishy identity. For mushrooms, then walnuts, then various fruits only, to finally embrace a controversial poison apple, and then morph into the sweet, tangy, mass-produced red condiment we know today. It's a culinary chameleon, constantly adapting, yet always remaining ketchup. Its ability to continually reinvent itself while maintaining its core function to add concentrated flavor is truly remarkable. You can almost feel the endless possibilities of its future evolution. Part of this enduring mystery lies in its perfect balance of basic tastes. As we discussed modern tomato ketchup hits, all 5 taste receptors, sweet, sour, salty, bitter, subtly and crucially umami. This harmonious blend creates a deeply satisfying, almost addictive flavor profile that appeals to a vast majority of palates. It's not too spicy, not too sour, not too sweet. It's just right, providing a comforting familiarity that transcends cultural boundaries. This meticulous balance, refined over centuries of trial and error, is a cornerstone of its lasting appeal. Furthermore, ketchup has demonstrated an unparalleled adaptability. It seamlessly transitioned from a niche flavoring agent for wealthy tables to a mass-market staple for fast food, then to a gourmet artisanal product and even a global culinary ambassador. It can be a dipping sauce, a cooking ingredient, a marinade, or a flavor enhancer, proving its versatility across diverse cuisines and contexts. Its consistent quality, largely thanks to pioneers like Heinz, also built a deep-seated consumer trust that few other condiments can boast. You trust that the ketchup will taste the same every single time. Its cultural integration is also key. Ketchup has become more than just food. It's intertwined with memories, rituals, and a sense of comfort and home. It's the familiar red blob on a child's plate, the go-to condiment at a barbecue, the ubiquitous presence in diners. This emotional connection makes it incredibly resilient to changing food trends. It's not just a sauce, it's a part of our lives. Historians still argue whether ketchup's global ubiquity is due to its universal flavor appeal or simply the immense marketing power of dominant brands. So, as you ponder the enduring mystery of ketchup, you realize its journey is far from over. It continues to evolve, to be reinterpreted, and to find new ways to connect with our ever-changing palates. From its ancient fishy origins to its vibrant tomato-rich present, ketchup remains a testament to culinary ingenuity, human adaptability, and the surprising complex history hidden within the simplest of everyday objects. Its secret history, a story of continuous transformation, is truly endless. The hum of the fan is a soft lullaby now, and the vibrant red of ketchup slowly fades from your mind's eye. You've journeyed through centuries of flavor, from ancient fish sauces to modern condiment aisles, uncovering the hidden history of a true culinary chameleon. Let the quiet settle around you, knowing that even the simplest things hold the most fascinating stories. Drift now into soft slumber. Sweet dreams.